Shalom and welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. We thank you for your time and joining us for what I hope to be, and I'm sure will be, a very, very interesting and fascinating conversation. Just a word, if you'd like to drop us a note with some ideas or suggestions, please feel free to do so. Rabbi Address at jewishsacredaging.com. We'd appreciate it if you go and like the Facebook page, the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. It would be greatly appreciated. We spend, as we often do here, talking about individual stories and the fascinating aspect of individual stories and what makes people choose certain things and moments in their life, pivotal moments, that in many ways change a person's life without maybe them even knowing it at the moment. We are very, very pleased to welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning Ed Skobac from down here in southern New Jersey, who is going to, I'm sure, bring us a very fascinating story. And so first of all, Ed, welcome to Seekers of Meaning. And I'm very happy that you joined us, and I hope you're well.
Thank you for having me.
The easy first question, because it really opens the door to the rest of our conversation. Who is William Skobac?
William Skobac was my father. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was 11 years old when World War II started, and he survived the war as an orphan, losing his entire family, probably about 100 people that were alive at that time, at the beginning of World War II. And we know of 4 survivors from our family at that time. And ultimately, he, near the end of World War II, was smuggled into Italy and then ultimately made his way into the United States in 1949.
So the journey of your father is a journey of a film. And indeed, if I'm not mistaken, a documentary is in the process of being produced by some that we all know, Steve Janoff, on your father. But that, and it's so hard, I think, for so many of us right now living in our contemporary world to understand what your father went through. When you was smuggled into Italy and eventually, but that process of surviving. And you mentioned something, I think, that not untypical before we started the taping. How often did your dad sit down and talk to you about this?
He never spoke to me about it.
Never.
No, when I was growing up, my father never spoke about anything that happened to him. And we never, on the other hand, we never asked. It became like a silent understanding. He didn't talk about it. We didn't bring it up. And I think that was very common. I grew up in the Bronx in the late 50s, early 60s. And I would say the majority of the kids I grew up with, parents were Holocaust survivors. And nobody knew their parents' story, and none of us asked questions. And I think that was more of the norm than an aberrancy. They just didn't want to talk about it.
So you've uncovered a slew of information.
Yeah.
How?
Well,
how did you do that?
Well, I think things started to change in this country. Speaking to other people whose parents were Holocaust survivors, after the TV series Holocaust actually was viewed, that kind of opened the door a little bit and gave permission, I think, for a lot of people to start talking about it. I have a brother who's almost 14 years younger than me, and his growing up was very different. My father did mention things here and there. He never told the whole story, but he would occasionally say things to my brother that he never said to me. Because the difference in our age, I was, through my education, out of the house already, and I was living in California, and I moved back to New Jersey in late 1983. And then in 1989, a good friend of mine, came down to visit me, and my parents just happened to be there, and he mentioned that he had just come back from Poland with his in-laws, who were both Holocaust survivors, and they had just done a trip to Poland to their hometown, and they had just come back a week before the three of us were standing in front of my house talking. And my father just sort of top of his head said, well, gee, if one of my kids wanted to go to Poland, I would go too, which sort of shocked me because I didn't know anything about what happened to my father, and he had never expressed any desire to go back to Poland. And I kind of leaped on the opportunity, and I said, "Well, great, because I would love to go to Poland." And I started planning a trip. In 1989, it was not easy to plan a trip to Poland because there was not a lot of travel information, readily available like there is now on the internet. I actually had to go up to New York to the Polish consulate and get information to find out about bilingual drivers, and finally to get enough information to plan a trip using paper maps and trying to figure out. And then about 3 months before we left, I told my father, I don't know where we're going. So I need to interview you about what happened. And that was really the first time. So about 3 months before we left, I interviewed my father in my house, and I thought that interview was going to take about a half hour, and it took 2.5 hours. And it was one of a couple of interviews that I did with him after we came back. But we ended up going to Poland in June of 1990, which was an unusual time to go to Poland because the country was sort of half and half. It wasn't quite out of communism yet. It was still, but the Solidarity Party had people in government, so it was moving away. It was moving away from communism. So we went to Poland and visited his hometown, places where he hid out, and ultimately Treblinka and Auschwitz. And we kind of retraced his steps growing up and on the run. And we were able to, get that accomplished. And I filmed that. I bought a video camera just for that trip and interviewed him some more while we were in Poland. And it's really those materials that I've been working with to try to get this sort of final thing that Steve Janoff is working with. Subsequently, I've interviewed two of the other three survivors from my family, one who's in Israel and one who came to the United States in Detroit, and interviewed them. And we're trying to integrate that information into the final product as well.
Ed, I want you to see if you can paint a picture for me.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like for you? I'm sure it was overwhelming for your dad, but what was it like for you as the son who walked through the camps, knowing that, by chance, your dad could have been sacrificed? What were you feeling at that moment, those moments? Can you remember?
Well, yeah, I think that I had a lot of concern about going with my father. So I was 35 when we went. My father was 62. I remember thinking at the time that he was an old man. I'm older than he was when we went.
Be careful.
But I was just concerned how he was holding up. I think it was all so fresh to me, hearing the stories that, I think for me at the time it was more just, I was so curious about his life because I really knew nothing other than the fact that he didn't die. And there was a picture in the house that my parents had with my father, his parents, and his three sisters. I didn't even know their names. I didn't know. So I didn't know anything. And so for me, it was just hearing this story unfold, getting additional information while we were going. For me, the most moving time was when we were in Treblinka, because when we went to Treblinka, it was not easy to get to. The roads were out. The roads were terrible. We had a driver. And when we got there, as opposed to an experience, I don't know if you've ever been to Auschwitz, but at Auschwitz, you kind of feel like you're on a movie set. There's buildings, you've seen it in movies, and there's tons of tourist buses, and there are people. When we were at Treblinka, we were the only two people there. And I found that extremely moving. It was quiet as quiet could be. You just hear birds and crickets. And the two of us walking through. And Treblinka, there's nothing there. It's just headstones, and it's a field probably about 2 or 3 football fields large, just full of headstones, and each headstone is with the name of a village or a city where Jews perished. And we ultimately were able to find the town that my father's family was from, and we said Kaddish and other prayers there. And for me, it was just a sense of, it was like saying, it was like going to a funeral for the first time with my father for his family. And I think that's the reason fundamentally why he went and he would go through such a painful experience was, and he kept on saying this over and over again, that he never had time while he was there to do anything because he was just trying to stay alive. And when he left Poland at 16, he didn't know he was never coming back. He didn't know. He just knew he was getting the heck out of Poland because it wasn't safe. And and I think he regretted that he never got to say Kaddish for his family at the site where they died. Ultimately, we found out they all died at Treblinka. We went to both Auschwitz and Treblinka because we didn't know at that time which place they died in.
And the name of the town? What was the name of your ancestor?
My father was grew up in Volomine. His parents moved there a few years before he was born. But my entire family, both on my father's side and my mother's side, were from a town of Ostrołęka, Poland, which is further north.
Tell me about your mom and all of this.
So my mother was a first-generation American. Her father came here in 1913. The original plan was to get my grandmother over here right away, but World War I intervened, and she didn't come till 1920. 2 of her children died during World War I. She came here with a daughter and a son. Son died soon after coming here, and then my grandmother had 2 more children, one of which was my mother, and she met my dad when she was 19, and my father at the time was 21, and they got married pretty quickly. And I was born in 1955. I have an older brother who was born in 53. So I think a lot of the Holocaust survivors, they got busy making families.
Well, yeah, that stands to reason, doesn't it? And what did your dad do here in the United States once he got settled in the States?
So he started a small business making foam rubber for couches, for upholsterers who needed foam rubber for couches and chairs. And then ultimately he went into the family business that my grandfather had, which was real estate management. And he did that till he died. My father worked pretty much till he died.
You say he went to Italy.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. And I have a note that he wanted to go to Palestine, but didn't.
So
talk to me about that.
Yeah. So the thing about what my father didn't know is because he was the youngest child. He was born in 1928. That he didn't know he had an aunt that came to the United States in 1920, and so he was oblivious to the fact that he had family in the United States. When the war started, he was 11, and then they didn't talk about family tree. The subsequent years, they were just trying to stay alive. So he didn't know about having family in the United States, but he had a cousin who was very Zionist, and his father was very religious, not Zionist, and they clashed a lot. And his cousin fled his home and made his way to Israel in 1938. And my father used to play with him, and he was aware that he had a cousin that was in Israel in 1938. So while the war was going on, the Palestinian Brigade was smuggling Jews from Poland into Italy. And my father and his cousin, the 2 of them, found out about it, and they snuck across the border to Czechoslovakia. They took trains, ultimately made their way to Salzburg, Austria, and then there, the Palestinian Brigade put them in trucks, and they went over the Alps into northern Italy. The war was still going on when that was happening, and then ultimately he joined a Irgun kibbutz and made his way down to the sort of the heel of the boot of Italy, where they started smuggling Jews into Israel. And he would send them with money and say, put an ad in the paper in Israel. I'm looking for a cousin, Zev Nadborny, and Wolf Skobac is alive and living in Italy. Well, what he didn't know was there were other relatives in Israel who had gotten to Israel anywhere between like 1900 and 1930, and were living there, and they were in touch with his aunt in the United States, and he didn't know any of these people existed, but they knew, and so while he was in a DP camp in Italy, he started getting mail and packages. People in Israel saying, "Come to Israel." People in the United States saying, "Come to the United States." Ultimately, he ended up deciding to come to the United States.
And again, the thing that's so fascinating about these stories is like you make a choice.
Yeah.
Very few of us, I think, can imagine what it was like for your dad sitting in that DP camp in Italy, being in many ways pulled between Palestine, the United States, and in that one position, that one choice, everything changes.
Yeah. So he had gotten a lot of information from the people that they smuggled into Israel. And remember that my father was Irgun, which was a minority party in Israel. He was not Sahal. And the people started sending letters back that they smuggled in saying, you may want to reconsider coming to Israel. Number one, there's going to be a war. Number two, a lot of us are getting malaria. And number three is that we're not being treated particularly well by the Sahal people in Israel. And I think that really disillusioned my father to the whole thing, that after all that the infighting between Jews going to Israel, and that really bothered him. And I think that strongly influenced his decision to come to the United States.
From just some of the notes that were sent, your dad had what it seems to be a number of very, very close calls.
Yeah.
And as he made his way in this unbelievable journey, there's one about the thing, pain and hands sticking out. Can you recall that?
So what happened was, my father, when he was in the ghetto, the Volomine ghetto was being liquidated in the fall of 42. And there had just been a typhoid epidemic that went through Volomine, and it killed people on both sides, the Jews and non-Jews in Volomine. And my grandfather was actually a wealthy man in Volomine, and he had connections with the mayor and business people, and he was able to acquire 2 birth certificates, one for his older sister and one for my father. His older sister immediately left the ghetto and went to Warsaw. My father stayed with the family, and using this paper, he kind of moved them out of the ghetto one by one by train to another part of Poland closer where they originally came from. And then him and his father stayed outside of the ghetto and would sneak food into the ghetto that his mother and sisters were in to keep them going. And then essentially they were all rounded up, and my father escaped. And he ended up having to the last year and a half to stay on a farm in a very rural area in northern Poland, and the farmer gave him permission to come back and see his family because he didn't know my father was Jewish. And on his way back to see his sister, they had made a meeting time. He was on a train station, and a train pulled in, and my father was sitting there, and there was a train full of cattle cars, which were probably heading to Treblinka, given the train line it was on. And there was a hand sticking out with like a cup, and there was a woman saying "Wasser, Wasser," and the guard opened the door and put his bayonet on his rifle and just started stabbing people that were packed up to the door. And my father became terrified because he had never seen this, and he was unaware of what was going on. He didn't know the gas chambers and the concentration camps. He was just in hiding. So he was afraid that his reaction to what was going on might give him away, and he ultimately made his way out of the station. Um, Most of my father's close calls were just, um, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, he was on this farm, and they would smuggle, and they would help people who were smuggling get across the border. And because they were close to the border, my father knew how to move people from one side to the other. And one time, two of the people from his hometown happened to be the people doing the smuggling, and he was very afraid he was going to be recognized. Um, and so he managed to keep his back to them the whole time. And then one time he came back to visit his sister. The same trip when he went to visit his sister, he was recognized by one of the children he used to play with, and the kid tried to extort him, for money, or he was going to turn him in. And my father essentially uh, beat him unconscious with a rock and fled, um, and never came back. Never saw his sister again after that one visit. Um, and then there were close calls because after the Russians liberated the, um, the Poles, um, the Poles were killing Jews after the war. They were liberated, and my his uncle was murdered by Poles, and he just one day before he came to visit him. Had he been there a day earlier, he would have been killed with his uncle. And he when he was trying to make his way back to his hometown, he had to get behind the Russian advance. And as the Russians were moving, he was staying behind them. But he was picked up by Russians because there was this kid following their movements, and they thought he might be a spy. And so they arrested him. And he just got lucky that there was a Jewish captain in that particular unit, and he kept on telling these people that he's Jewish, that he wouldn't be spying for the Germans. And this Jewish captain came in and said, "Prove that you're Jewish." And he gave him a siddur, and he said, "You know what this is?" And my father said, "Yes, it's a siddur." And he says, "You know how to daven?" My father said, "Sure." And he had him daven, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're Jewish." So he wrote him a paper saying that any Russian convoys, please, provide this person with assistance. And my father would hitchhike on Russian military convoys while he was, trying to find his family as the war was winding down.
I was told to ask you also about a, a, a story with your dad in one of those moments uh, of choice. Again,
Yeah.
one of these choice moments with with him breaking into a house to
Well,
exact revenge. And
yeah. Well, so this when my father finally came back to his hometown when the Russians liberated everything, um, he got a gun from one of the Russians and told them that he was this kid who tried to extort him. He was, he wanted uh, to scare him, and so they gave him a gun, and he went back to his hometown, and he went to the house where this kid lived, who was also about 16 at the time, and he waited for him with his mother and with the boy's mother, and then the boy came in. My father pulled out the gun, and but he made the kid tell his mother what he had done, that he had tried to extort him and was going to turn him in. And the mother was begging my father not to kill him, and my father didn't. And he returned back to the Russians, where he got the gun and gave them the gun back.
did your dad tell you that story?
Yes, yeah. That's it. He didn't tell it to me before we went. He told it to me uh, when I interviewed him a second time after we came back. When the first interview was more generated by me, like questions that I had. I didn't know enough to ask like secondary questions. When we were in Poland, more things started hitting his head, and he would mention things, and I wrote them down, and I interviewed him a second time, and a lot of this sort of more detail of things that happened came out because of the second interview.
I want, and thank you very much for sharing. It's unbelievable. I mean, it really, these are unbelievable stories. And this leads me to a question, because these stories, I don't know how long these stories are going to last.
Yeah.
This is being posted in the end of May. About a month ago in the New York Times, there was this very, very interesting op-ed, lead editorial in the New York Times, called "A New Generation of Holocaust Storytellers." And it really was the theme, which is, look, who's going to keep these stories alive? And I know you're very, very involved with this. How do we keep these stories alive so that they mean something as time goes on and on and on and on? And and you have this thing now that's driving so many of us crazy. You have school districts who are banning books that reflect and talk. How do you, as a child of a Holocaust survivor who's walked this walk with your dad, who's walked through Treblinka with your, how do you understand this?
Well, I think you have to engage people through their areas of interest. I think if you just try to force this stuff on people, they're going to lose interest very quickly, because to them, again, this happened so long ago. I think in the context of that, there seems to be an unending series of genocides on the planet during my lifetime. That I think that's the approach you have to go through. That, and not to have a feeling of that this is a more, although to me it's more important because it's my family, but I think you have to approach it more from that genocide is the problem. And I'm going to give you an example of genocide because this is what I'm familiar with, but I think you have to link it to all the genocides that have been going on, and will always, unfortunately, provide some current context to that seem relevant to a younger generation.
It's a tremendous challenge. I mean, history is, well, nobody teaches history anymore. So it's that's part of the problem. We've lost the ability to understand that we're part of something greater than ourselves. And it's why these stories are so powerfully important to keep alive.
I mean, I worried about this from a young age because I didn't know the story, and
Right.
And once I became aware of the story, it was important for me and my entire family and my extended family, because they didn't know the story either, and they're all now very aware of it because I interviewed my father and we filmed it, and they've had something to look at for a while now. But as I've gotten older, it's become more important to me that people who never knew my father know his story, and that's why I'm trying to put together something that's a little bit more relevant and easier to assimilate for my granddaughter and her generation.
How old are your grandchildren?
I have one granddaughter; she's 5, and
So,
and so when I'm redoing all this material, I think of her as the target audience.
right. Because she is. She
Yeah.
is. She is. So when she sees this, when she's 12 and 13 or 22, and
Mhm.
perhaps taking a class at a university on, the history of World War II, you think she'll be able to pull this video out
The
and say,
intent, yeah, that's the intent. Is we're going to put it online and do it a series of chapters that are small, short. And so if she wants to know what my father's life was like in Poland before World War II, she'll be able to do that. If she wanted to know his experiences during the war, early on in the ghetto, when he was in the ghetto for 2 years, she could get that information. Then we're going to try to have it sort of his period of being liberated, and then his trip to Italy, and ultimately what it was like to come to the United States. And so it's going to be more like a chapter book, and she'll be able to access it as much or as little as she wants, but it will be there in smaller sort of time intervals, so that it's not going to be one overwhelming, like a documentary.
No. Ed, you've done your family and your father well, and he lives through you and these stories, which is true part of Jewish concept of memory. So I thank you for your time and your willingness to share some of the stories about your dad and your family, and wish you just continued success and most of all health.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me on.
No, thank you very much. It's our honor. So thank you.
All right.
To all of you, thank you very, very much again for joining us on today's edition of The Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We appreciate your time. Again, if you'd like to contact us, just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. If you'd like to continue to support us, again, go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com. Click on the donate button and just follow the prompts. We do appreciate this, and we want to thank our producer, Steve Lubetkin, because these podcasts are recorded at the studios of Lubetkin Media Companies here in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Again, until we see each other again on our next edition, thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. And most of all, be kind to one another. Todah, shalom.